Breath, bridging ordinary and altered states. We have about, say, 50 minutes together, and I'm going to share a bit about breathwork, my story with breathwork, my observations from working with over 200 clients one-on-one and in group settings, and also talking about altered states, meditation, psychedelics. So before we start, I want to invite us all just to arrive here now. So if you can close your eyes for a moment. And just notice maybe the feel of the seat underneath you. Notice anything that you are leaning against, maybe the table in front of you or behind you. You're going to breathe in through the nose. Breathe out through the mouth. Breathe in through the nose. Breathe out through the mouth. One more time. Still keeping the eyes closed, just breathing in a natural way. Starting to become present to the quality of the air that's entering your nose. Does it feel very cold or cool or warm? Does it have a texture? Does it feel sharp or light or heavy? And seeing if you can trace the journey of that breath as it enters your body, maybe into your face, down your throat, into your chest, and then as it comes back out. This exchange that we're doing with this space, this lecture room, also with each other. Letting the muscles in your face, in your belly, in your hips just relax and sink. Sink into whatever you're sitting on, leaning on, resting upon. And finally, inside your own body, inside your own mind, just ask yourself why you came here today. Maybe there's a question you want to ask, something you want to learn or explore or hear about. Just see what comes up. So you're just opening your eyes, coming back here. Okay, so that's how I start all my workshops, with a bit of arriving. Oftentimes workshops at the end of the day, and we've come, on traveling, cycling, on public transport. We've had a lot of things going on, and even though your body might be here, your mind might not be here, your emotions might not be here. So having a pause is a way to just slowly start to arrive. And I'm sure we're all going to be arriving. Like, I was on a train 20 minutes ago, so I'm still like, whoa, we're all here. So this is me, I'm Yasmin. This is who I am on paper. So if you looked at my biography or my CV, these are all the facts, and I don't think that necessarily represents me, but it gives a context, explaining to you where I've come from, the conditions in which I've become who I am. So these are the countries that I've lived in. I was lucky enough to spend 18 years in Thailand. That's where I was born. I studied in the UK, doing human sciences at Oxford. And during that time, I was super into political justice, super into public health. In human sciences, it's quite similar to a degree here called HSBS. So basically, you're doing biological science and social science. But the difference is that at Oxford, they make you link it together. So for example, you might be studying, let's say obesity, but you'll look at it from like a systemic perspective, like how the city is designed, but you'll also look at it from a genetic perspective, like maybe the predispositions, you'll look at ways social factors have influenced gene expression. But anyway, that's what I did. And then I got a scholarship and I went to study in Beijing at Peking University, doing China studies. So this is me at my graduation on the Great Wall, which was crazy. We had like 100 people on the Great Wall. And while I was in China, I focused on trauma. specifically on how people in Shanghai who had been through some kind of traumatic experience, whether that is divorce or abuse or neglect or whatever it might be, how these people used embodied practices, be it yoga, dance, breathwork, meditation, to begin to integrate whatever they had gone through. So on paper, that's everything that I was really interested in. And I just put that picture of me as a child to show you, I think, the seeds that were planted. So I grew up in Thailand, Buddhist country. My mom is an Ashtanga teacher. Ashtanga is a form of yoga, and she's been teaching now for 25 years. So growing up, I was very much exposed to that other world, and now my mission is kind of to bridge the two. So that brings me to where I am now. Oh no, there's no Wi-Fi bit. Oh, there's a really nice picture here, but it's okay. You can see the little picture there. So this is where I am now. I've been in London for about 6 months, where I founded my own company, formally a company, my own organization called Wavekind. And at Wavekind, what we do is we bring people on journeys to the deepest presence. This means that I'm not trying to help people, plan a future they desire, nor am I intentionally trying to help them process things in the past. Instead, I'm trying to bring them here into whatever is in the body in the moment. And sometimes the effect might be that you process something you've been carrying. And I'll go into that later, how the body holds on to emotion and memory. Or it might be that in this moment of presence, you feel a lot of inspiration and you know how you want to move forward. So that could happen. But my primary goal is to bring people deeply into the here and the now. We do this mainly through breathwork, which I'll explain more about in a moment, but also through embodiment exercises, which I'll also explain a bit about. So I've been in London for 6 months, but I've been practicing this as my full-time life purpose occupation for a year, and I've had the pleasure of working in 9 different cities, working with over 200 breathers between ages 18 and 82. So you can imagine all kinds of life circumstances. People just starting to think about who they are. People, at the end of a long corporate career, having burnout, questioning things. People perhaps on their 2nd or 3rd marriage. People at the end of life and dealing with grief. All kinds of situations. And I would say, overall, I try to ensure that my workshops and my sessions are somatic, meaning grounded in the body. I'm not trying to take you out of the body, I'm trying to bring you deeper into the body, grounded and trauma aware. So how did I find my way here? Long story short, I think for most of my life I had always been an extremely driven, a driven person, very much led by my mind. Like, if I wanted to do something, I would do it. I had my first job at 15, working for an international health NGO. I was the kind of person where my passwords to all my accounts were like mind over matter, discipline is everything. Like, it's not that anymore, so don't try and hack. But I was someone who really was like, it's all about my mind, like everything is, if I can think about it, if I can plan it, if I can organize it, like everything's gonna be okay. And basically, about 3 years ago, I reached this point where I just could not push my way through anymore. And that was really scary. And I think what led me to that point was that there are some things in life that you just really cannot push through. For me, that was death. The death of someone close to me. That was cancer in someone close to me, and it was also the dissolution of my first adult relationship. Bang, 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 all in the span of 1 month. And when you get to that point and you meet yourself there, it's very confronting because it's almost like who you thought you were and what you thought you could do begin to dissolve. And so I'm feeling a bit emotional now thinking about it, but the point I want to make is that there was this point in my life where I could not push anymore. And I tried to remedy that through continuing to push, through making better routines. Didn't help, but what actually helped was breathwork. And I was in conventional therapy, talk therapy, and that was useful. I'd been in talk therapy for about 2 or 3 years at that point, leading up to the breakdown. But I found that every single therapist I saw would say things to me like, oh, Yasmin, you're so emotionally intelligent. Yasmin, you're so thoughtful. Yasmin, you're so self-reflective. And I think all of those things were true because I was so good at using my mind to understand everything. But what breathwork did for me was it dropped me into my body, into the very pure and basic experience of feeling, which I had never really done before. And that for me changed everything. Overall, I think I realized that my body is my body for a reason. The body is not only something to control, nor is the body something to discipline. I think in modern society, we're often trying to discipline the body through exercise, through diets, and that's great. It's like, it's important for health, but it's so rare that you're actually asked to just exist in the body, just to feel it, almost like a baby or like an animal. And that's where the shift is. So, what is breathwork? You might have heard about breathing, pranayama, and the way that I tend to divide it are into 2 parts. So first is traditional styles of breathwork. You can think of yoga, Tibetan Buddhism, which is what I'm most familiar with, Taoism, and in these, you could say like more, traditional styles. Breathing is seen as a tool to still the mind. So it's done before meditation. It's done to create that kind of calmness so that you can, for example, in yoga, move into higher states of being, or in Tibetan Buddhism, to move to deeper styles of meditation, where perhaps you're starting to investigate karma or the quality of your mind. So breathing is seen as a tool, like a preparation, almost like a warm-up before you run. Let me see, have I forgotten anything? No. I also wanted to say that in the traditional styles where breathing is used, it's also a tool to dissolve the self. So for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, a practice that I often engage with is one called Tonglen. And this is a practice that's very beautiful, and the aim is to unseal the spring of compassion that lies within us. So very basically what you do is when you breathe in, you consciously try and imagine the suffering of a person you know or a situation, really imagining like the quality of pain or of discomfort that they're in. Breathe that into your own body, and there might be fear like, oh, why would I want to absorb someone else's pain? But that's the point. You're trying to dissolve these walls around yourself. So you breathe that in, and then you exhale peace, you exhale whatever it is that the situation needs. So those are traditional styles. Hello. Welcome. So I just basically I'm explaining a bit about breathwork and the different styles, and I've shared that traditional styles are primarily about stabilizing the mind and starting to dissolve the self. But now going to modern styles. So modern, I would say, refer to styles that came out in the 20th century. There are 2 main types. The first is restorative or functional. So this type of breathing you might see, for instance, athletes do, specific techniques and practices to increase their resilience to CO2 in the body. Or perhaps you might have encountered it on short Instagram clips, like box breathing for anxiety or extended exhales to reduce stress. So they're very like short, snappy things that you can do in a few minutes. Then the final style is what I call integrative or circular breathwork. And I'm going to go into this in the next slide. So integrative, so this is from my workshop on Saturday actually. So integrative breathwork refers to styles of breathing that share these 3 factors. This is my definition, there's no one out there who said it. So if someone else out there says something different. So integrative breathwork involves a circular breathing pattern. Basically, if you observe your breath, you might notice that there is a pause that usually happens in between the inhale and exhale. So you might breathe in, there'll be a brief pause, and then you'll breathe out, and then there'll be a brief pause. In this style of breathing, we're trying to eliminate that pause. So we're letting that inhale run into the exhale, run into the inhale, run into the exhale. So it becomes like a circle. It's continuous. Then you breathe in this continuous way for at least 40 minutes, and it is this technique that allows you to enter non-ordinary or altered states of consciousness. Now you might be wondering who these two men are, and I'll explain that very briefly. So when we think of integrative breathwork, there are two main styles that people have heard of. The first is holotropic. Has anyone heard of this before? Maybe? No, okay. So holotropic breathwork, the sessions are usually 3 hours, and it's very strongly associated with psychedelics. The reason for this is that it was founded by this man called Stanislav Grof, and he was researching LSD, I want to say, in the 50s. And he noticed that when people were taking LSD, they would start to breathe in this kind of rapid, deep, continuous way. Then LSD was classified as a kind of class A drug, where he was doing his research, and he was wondering, how can we recreate this effect without the drug? And he thought, let's just replicate the breathing. And he saw that actually people would have similar experiences. They would have these experiences of visions, of hallucinations, of remembrance. So that's his style. Then the second style is the one that I've actually been trained in. It's called rebirthing breathwork. And this man over here is called Leonard Orr. Kind of a funky, odd man. The story goes that he was in his bathtub, and like any one of us who takes a bath, he decided to bring a snorkel. And so there he was in his bathtub with his snorkel, underwater, with the pipe, with the snorkel. And he was just breathing continuously through his mouth. And he was like, whoa, I'm starting to experience some shifts in my state of consciousness. I want to come back and do this. And so he would go back to his bathtub again and again and again, trying to breathe in this way. And he called it the style of breathwork that emerged, rebirthing, because for him, the experience of being in that warm bath, breathing in this way, he claims actually helped him to remember experiences of being in his mother's womb, experiences of being born, experiences that are pre-verbal, so when you are, say, less than 2 or 3 years old. And he replicated this style, taught it to other people, and other people began to find that they could remember experiences in the womb and birth. And his whole theory is that everything that happens, so this is where it gets a bit woo-woo, and you can take it with a pinch of salt. His whole theory is that everything that happens from the moment you're conceived, for example, whether it was a violent conception, whether it was a conception that was desired, all the way through gestation, the conditions of the mother during her pregnancy. Was she happy? Was she fighting? Was she stressed? Was she surrounded by care? Was she isolated? All the way through birth, leave an imprint on us that continue to affect us through our lives. However, now, I think many of us know that these traumas don't only happen in the first 3 years of life and before. You can have a traumatic event happen when you're 17, when you're 60. And so rebirthing breathwork today is very much associated with trauma awareness. And just a quick aside, what is trauma? Something I feel is very important to clarify is that trauma is not the event. For example, a car crash for one person might be a really traumatizing thing, for another person it isn't. Trauma is when the response to an event stays stuck in the body. So an example of this is, let's say, and it stays stuck in the body and it can't be released. So an example of this, let's say a car crash happens and you are in the car, but you're able to escape. Like, the car is not so badly hit, you can step out, you feel a bit panicked, woof, that you can cry, you can release, and then 2 weeks later, you feel okay. You're like, yeah, I had a car crash, but I'm okay. So for that person, it might not be traumatic. But let's say for another person, they were in a car crash, there was a collision, they were stuck inside the car, they couldn't escape, and they just had to sit, and all this energy was stuck inside of them, and there was no possibility for release. So maybe for this other person who was unable to let that charge, to let that energy move through them, they might have experiences in the future, such as maybe they're very scared of riding in cars. So that's what we would say is a trauma response. So I share this to say trauma isn't the event, it's the response to the event. So I think the final thing I want to say is both of these guys, even though they had very different roads to discovering breathwork. What they share in common is the continuous breathing pattern and the recognition that your breathing can shift your state of being. So what happens when you breathe? I actually had a video here, so I'll just play it in the background while I share a bit. So this is a session I gave actually 1 whole year ago at the Royal Academy of Art in London to one of my friends who's an artist there, hence why she's in a dinosaur costume. So there she is lying down, and she's just breathing. So when you're breathing in this continuous way, what happens is that CO2 levels begin to drop inside of you, and this leads to what you can see in her hands. She's having some tingles, she's having some tension. But when the CO2 levels drop, that is what causes the altered state of consciousness. So there was a paper that was published earlier this year. If you Google the Brighton Breathwork Research Lab, I went there for a talk, and one of the papers that they are associated with is one where they show that the effect of psilocybin is very similar to breathwork in the sense of like the blending that happens, the oceanic boundlessness. You just kind of like melt, dissolve into whatever is happening. And that's due to the CO2 levels dropping. When you're breathing in this continuous way, activity in the prefrontal cortex also decreases. So the prefrontal cortex is like that part of the brain that is, I'm not a neuroscientist, okay? It's a part of the brain that's to do with thinking and executive action and problem solving. So all of that starts to quieten down. Activity also reduces in the default mode network. So this is a network of parts of your brain that create that normative sense of self. So as you can see, there are all these things that are starting to quieten down. What is becoming louder are the emotional parts of the brain, the limbic brain. So basically what you're seeing is this shift from thinking, from deciding, to feeling and experiencing. So yeah, this is 49 minutes. Sorry, we're not going to watch it all. But all I want to say from this is you can see she's breathing in a continuous way. I'm next to her, I'm adjusting the music according to how she's breathing. I'm not sure if you saw, but I was also giving touch at some points, because touch is something that's very primal and basic and can help people to connect to different parts. If you think about it, touch is one of the first senses that we engage with when we're born. And so altered states. So I've talked a lot about coming to this other place. Breathwork is one way, but there are many ways. Deep meditation, hypnosis, psychedelics, dreaming, fasting, trance. And many people ask me, like, okay, cool, altered states, why should I go there? What's the point? For me, and speaking from my experience and my experience of breathing with people, I think the point of going to altered states is it gives you a chance to step out of the normal way of being. Almost like, you can think about it like this, right? Imagine there's a box. And usually for most of life, we're inside that box, and everything we know and do is inside that box. And so we don't know anything different. We might not even know that we're in a box. When you enter an altered state through various means, you're given the chance to step outside of the box, to look at the box, and maybe even to understand something in a new way. It is this distance that gives us the opportunity for action. It gives us the opportunity to perhaps understand something differently, to be conscious about how we want to engage in something, be conscious about how we want to perceive things. So yeah, basically you're breaking the habit of thinking and reasoning the way that you've always thought and reasoned. What else do I want to say about this? So I can give you an example from a client that I worked with one-on-one yesterday, actually. So this client that I worked with one-on-one, they've struggled with anxiety for many, many years. They had a very traumatic childhood, and they've been in cognitive behavioral therapy. They've been working with different kinds of psychotherapists, and what they said was that it helps, but they find themselves stuck in the same pattern. This person has been working with me for 7 sessions. So yesterday was their 7th session. And in yesterday's session, what they said to me was that when they were breathing, they started to feel the anxiety come up in their body, the physical feelings of anxiety, like your heart racing, maybe your body is starting to clench and tighten, this feeling of contraction. But during the breathwork, because I kept guiding them into being present with the sensations, they said to me, I actually feel really calm. And there's this weird thing that's going on where my body is really anxious and I'm feeling all of the things I usually feel when I'm anxious. But in my head, I feel super calm. And you might be wondering, why does that matter? Why does that mean anything? For me as a facilitator and as an observer in that dynamic, in that situation, I think the feeling it leaves me with is a sense of hope, because for this person perhaps they can realize like, oh, there are two parts to this anxiety. There's the physical and there's the emotional. And maybe they don't always have to feed their physical anxiety with thoughts. Maybe by becoming conscious of the anxiety, they can start to separate from it. And then with that space in their daily life, choose to engage in practices that might quell the physical anxiety. Whether that is going for a walk in the park or listening to music or whatever it is for that person. So this is what I mean when I say that you enter an altered state. For this person, normally the two are together. And they even said to me after that usually when they feel anxious, they consciously try and feed the anxiety, thinking like, okay, why am I anxious? Actually making themselves more anxious. So yeah, these are some things that can happen in an altered state. And I just put a box here to show that in breathwork, similar to deep meditation, fasting, psychedelics, what you're really doing is opening boxes in yourself that may have normally been shut. So perhaps it's not uncommon that people might remember memories that have been repressed. It's not uncommon that emotions that have been held in the body for a long time have the chance to pass through. So that's what I mean when I say we're opening boxes. I'm so sad that all the photos are gone because I had some really nice ones. But my final thing I wanted to say on this part of altered states is that it's not all about the mind. For me, it's very much also about the body. And the way that I see the body, having worked with different people, is that the body is an archive. There is this constant conversation that is happening between the body, the lived external world, and the emotional processing. So as an example, I worked with a client in March or April this year who also had very complex childhood trauma, who grew up in an environment where she was constantly told, oh, your emotions are the problem, like, if you stop being so emotional, then everything will be okay. And she grew up hearing that kind of narrative. And what that has led her to do is to learn to suppress her emotions and to judge her own emotions, also to suppress her own needs. In our breathwork session, she was lying down and she was breathing, and she started to feel a lot of tension around the chest area, which through breathing with lots of people, I've seen that the chest is associated with relationship, with feeling. There are some other interesting things, but focusing on the chest for now. And I dialogued with her and I said, okay, what are you feeling right now? She said, I'm feeling this kind of clenching to the left of my chest. I said, okay, let's not try and access anything different. Let's breathe into it. Let's feel the shape of this clenching. Let's feel the depth of it, how big, how small. And what she came to was this feeling of jealousy. And she said to me, I realize I'm such a jealous person. I'm really jealous of this person for what they have, and I'm always wanting this from that person. And she started to get talking and saying, I'm such a bad person, why am I so jealous, da-da-da-da-da. And I said, okay, let's stay with that jealousy, all parts are welcome. So we continued to breathe. I asked her to explore that jealousy, where it was spreading, maybe other thoughts, emotions that were here. And eventually, through the breath, the jealousy itself settled, and we came to something deeper, which was her own needs. And the realization she came to, partly in the altered state, and also using the body, is that for her, because she's always been disconnected from her needs, the easiest way for her to express needs is through jealousy. It's much easier for her to say, oh, I'm so jealous that this person has this thing, than to say, oh, I need this thing for myself. So under jealousy actually was a sense of self-love, you could say, of self-acknowledgement of her own needs. Another thing I wanted to share was, I think from exploring the body as an archive, another client story, is I've come to see how we wrap our feelings in other feelings. So similar to the story I just shared about that lady, I had a client who came into the session, I think this was also in Feb March, like really tall client, lay down, started breathing, and this person started to feel a sense of fear and panic. They were saying to me, my heart is racing a lot, like I'm feeling like my hands are clenching, my feet are clenching, like my body's clenching, I'm feeling very fearful. And I said, okay, let's stay with that fear. So we breathed into the fear, again, trying to tap into the objective aspects of the fear, the size, the shape, the location, the color, the depth, all of these things. And then memories started to open up. And this person told me, I remember the first time I felt fear was at kindergarten, just crying when my parents left me. And then another memory came up. I see myself crying at summer camp and crying so much and feeling so ashamed for crying that my parents actually had to come and pick me up. And through this, you were feeling all of these fears, present fear, past fear. This is what I said about altered states, distorted sense of time. So all of these memories from the past, feeling them now as if this person was that 5-year-old at summer camp or, at kindergarten. Feeling all of that fear, staying with that fear. And then we actually began to talk to that child. So this is where I bring in a bit of internal family systems, you might have heard of it. That basically I said to this person, how old are you right now? It's like, I'm 6 years old, for example. Okay, what are you feeling? Where are you? And really bringing that person back there. Start to talk to the child to say, okay, I'm not a child, I'm not 5 years old. What does this child need? This child needs to know that they are loved and supported by the family. Okay, how can we say that to the child? And having this internal sense of dialogue. And it ended up being extremely healing for this person because fear had been such a dominant emotion in their life. Fear and shame around fear. Yeah. The final thing I want to say about the body is that having breathed with so many people, especially older people, you can I'm very good at guessing how people are feeling by looking at the shape of their bodies. I've started, maybe this sounds like pseudoscience, perhaps it is, but I've noticed that people who carry a lot of rigidity in their upper body, where their ribs aren't very flexible, where their bodies tend to be like this, they tend to be quite defensive people. And underneath that defensiveness is often fear, feeling like they are threatened, feeling unsafe, feeling very alone. I've also noticed that for people with low self-esteem, they tend to carry themselves in a more hunched way, almost like they are, curling in towards themselves because they don't want to be seen. And this also links to the breath because how tight or flexible your body is impacts how much movement there can be in the intercostal muscles, in the diaphragm. So a common thing, people with anxiety, the muscles tighten, the diaphragm can't move as much, breathing is less, then because they're not getting efficient gas exchange in their body becomes stressed, feeding the anxiety, and it is this cycle that just goes and goes and goes. So breathing is one way that we can, through altered states, create distance, but also through the body itself, maybe begin to break that pattern. Finally, the unsexy half is integration. So with psychedelics, breathwork, fasting, meditation, all of these things, we're opening boxes, we're experiencing ourselves in new ways. Maybe we're getting in touch with repressed memories, getting in touch with repressed emotions that we don't usually want to face. That's great. But what happens when the box is open? I think in our society, especially with this psychedelic renaissance, something that scares me is this running towards opening boxes and not enough emphasis on going through the box. Going through the box through integration, for me, comes in 3 different ways. So physiologically, let's say after a difficult event, giving yourself the time to just physiologically calm down, whether that's having a week off where you're not thinking about this thing so that your body can just calm down. It can also be emotional, so spending time perhaps journaling on what has come up. If there are feelings that come up, sitting with the physical feeling. So for example, I often advise my clients to, if after a difficult feeling, a session, some feelings come up, to just stop whatever they're doing, close their eyes, and literally just feel, like an animal, just feel. No, explaining or narrativizing, but just feeling whatever is here. And it can also be behavioral. So for example, making the conscious decision to change certain things in your life, or to change ways of thinking, ways of being. I think the one that I forgot to add is communal. Integration, for me, doesn't only happen alone. It happens in conversation with people. So perhaps that could be in the breathwork session itself, having someone you trust and care, witnessing that. Or it could look like talking with someone you trust afterwards, finding ways to heal whatever patterns are in the larger context. But I think the part that makes integration difficult for me is that in breathwork, we're often coming into contact with the very present self. And the present self is sensitive. It's very much like a sponge. When you're fully present, you hear everything, you smell everything, you taste everything, right? Like if you think about moments when you've been truly present, it's just, there can be a sense of overwhelm. And this is more of a societal comment. I feel that our society makes it very hard for us to be present because there's so much stimulation. For me, living in London, something I found hard is like the tube and all the noises on the tube. The people, so many people, social media, there's just so much going on. And actually, before I moved to London, I was living on an island in Thailand where I saw maybe a maximum of 10 people in 4 months. And I didn't drive, I didn't go anywhere, so my life was very still, and I was very much in that presence. But when I came to London, I actually, for the first time in my life, had sensory overload, to the point where I couldn't take the tube, to the point where I would be in a restaurant and I'd be like, I need to go to the bathroom and just sit in the cubicle. My reason in sharing this is that these experiences, be it breathwork, psychedelics, whatever, they can open you up and make you very present, very sensitive, and it can be difficult to be in that state in the kind of culture that we're in. And so integration, I think, is in this culture is about how can we bridge between these two states, between the extreme presence and sensitivity and an overstimulating environment. How do we bridge between the two? So finally, I want to say that I will be doing a breathwork session here in Cambridge on Monday, the 1st of December, probably sometime between 4:30 and 7 p.m. It'll be a 2-hour session, £20 per people, max 12 people, because I can't facilitate safely for crowds of people. But if you would like to experience this yourself, I would really invite you to come and join. This is something you can only really understand when you try it yourself. The experience can be varied. For some people it's emotional, for some people it can be psychedelic, for some people it can be just very clear and relaxed. So this is my invitation to you. And finally, thank you for being here. This is my QR code where you can see upcoming events, my social media, all kinds of things. And these are my contact details. But yeah, thank you for coming to listen. And if there are any questions, please shoot off questions about me, about breathwork, about my practice, about client cases, and many, many stories. I want this to be useful for you. Thanks. Are there any questions? Go ahead.
I was wondering if someone that really, really has experiences, and I was wondering like how you help people out of the sessions, like from this point where you want to stay in from the world.
So my usual protocol is the last 30 minutes of the session are about starting to come down, for lack of a better word. And usually for me that looks like art. So I'll give people paper, I'll give people colors, and it's just about drawing whatever comes out. And the reason we draw is because it's nonverbal. So you're not getting back into the thinking, you're staying with the feeling. So that helps as a first step from that heightened state to take a step down. After the drawing, there'll be time, especially in one-to-one sessions and smaller workshops, such as the one next week, to have some sharing as a group, if that's desired. Sometimes sharing can help to bring closure. Also, hearing other people's experiences can start to bring closure. That's another step. Then the third step is afterwards, I give everyone journaling questions
So I really encourage everyone after each session to be sensitive with themselves, to know that they're going to go into a world where maybe suddenly the trees are brighter and the sounds are louder and the feelings are more intense. And I think knowing that can help people to create that context for themselves. So maybe instead of going to a club or, hopping on the tube, you might choose to go to the park or do something quiet, go to a cafe, sit down, journal. If people don't like journaling, some of my clients have just like voice noted themselves or just thought about it. And then usually I will email people after maybe a day or two just to check in, and people, if they would like, can give me a call. I'm always very happy to call or email me back. Not everyone does, but some people, they do like to talk to me. But it's a process. So especially for people who are working through situations, usually one session is like one session, but you have to go through many sessions to begin to move through these things slowly. I place a lot of emphasis on going slowly. Yeah. And I think the more intense stories that I was saying, they came from when I was working in a retreat center in Thailand. And I think that context allowed people to have these experiences because they weren't thinking, oh, I have this meeting to go to, or I have to do this. They were fully immersed. So I've also noticed clients in London tend to have less intense sessions because they're often like coming from this, going to that. And so your body is not going to release something when the context isn't there. Yeah.
I've had this experience, like the intense calm you talked about. I've had that experience, and a thing I've kind of felt happen is like I almost now chase the intense, even if it's like an emotion we might label negative. I almost now chase that because I know it's going to be so cathartic, and it's almost like I'm chasing the like intense physiological experience in order to get the like a catharsis, the like the intensity of the experience, rather than necessarily like processing. Or is that just a form of process? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I do observe this actually sometimes in people, like they're just trying to go push, feel apart. I think my question to you is why? Like, what are you needing so much catharsis from?
I guess. Or just, they're kind of everyday like background, or maybe not so much background, like the like 3 out of 10 experience of just general anxiety. I'm knowing that if I go to a 0 out of 10 or a 1 out of 10 experience for a short amount of time, I'll then have the like rush of coming back to more like a 7. If that makes.
As in, you're saying that in daily life you might be at a 3 out of 10 anxiety, and then breathwork brings you to that state of calm that after you come to a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
And you're telling me that you're seeking that 7 out of 10 anxiety.
Yeah, and it's almost it's like it's very much about achieving that state in the short term rather than necessarily fully processing where that keeps coming from, like why the 3 out of 10 is there, like a lot of the time.
I don't know. I think what comes to mind for me is, at least in my own explanation for myself, maybe it might resonate, maybe it might not, is sometimes living in this society where we're in a 3 out of 10 anxiety, we come to a state of numbness where we're not present. And there's this like blanket of jelly that exists around us to protect us from the overstimulation. And maybe in seeking that 7 out of 10, it's to feel something in a way.
Yeah. I think like that. I think that probably describes it quite well. Yeah. I want to like feeling like sadness, for example. I find actually under isolation. I think because I'm like so peace at the age of something. And actually that's better than that. That's it.
Yeah. I really think we're symptoms of this society. I can relate to that. I cried on Sunday for the first time, and obviously, there's a sadness of crying. I will admit, there was some part of me that was like, oh, I'm feeling things after like so long of not. So maybe the invitation for you and for me is to give ourselves maybe an opportunity to go with slowness, with letting whatever emerge, instead of chasing a 7 out of 10. And seeing what happens there, right? Like you can always come and breathe again and try a 7 out of 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Maybe, try going slowness, see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's helpful for like another question I had, which is like the stuff can become self-care, and like this whatever your realm of self-care is can just become yet another achievement, yet another thing on your to-do list to feel good about the fact that you did it.
Yeah.
Rather than like let's like be truly present in it and do it for its own sake, not in order to be able to like tell yourself that you've done it afterwards.
Yeah, that's why I think it's important to do breathwork repeatedly, because when you do, you'll have experiences where you fall asleep. You'll have experiences where nothing happens. You'll have experiences that are great and, releasing. And when you begin to meet yourself in all of these contexts through the same technique, it helps you to, I think, make it less of a thing about achievements. That's my take.
Yeah. Perhaps like focusing on simple procedural things. Like your kind of conscious goal going in is to do simple procedural things rather than any particular experience that might.
Yeah, I think for me, 2 things I would say is, one is the way I approach breathwork is it's like looking in an emotional mirror. And maybe some days there's nothing in the mirror.
Yeah.
And some days there's loads of blemishes and marks. Every day is going to be different. The second thing I found is that when people come in with a very strong expectation, for example, like, oh, I really want to release all of this anger or this or that, usually it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Because when you have a very, very strong goal, you're not being present, you're future oriented. So I think, in a way, bringing the focus back to the present, like, okay, I'm going to look in this emotional mirror and just see what's here today, right now, and maybe that's nothing, maybe that's something. That can help to remedy that. So a story I like to tell is, I had a session with this guy who was in prison, and he had a lot of anger inside of him, and he came to the session, he was like, I'm gonna have a really angry session, and he was just like, I can't wait to get rid of all this anger. Lay down, he was breathing, and he was so relaxed, like nothing came out. And my reading of that was the anger wasn't there to come out that day, and 2, he had a flight to catch 2 hours after our session. So there's probably a part of his brain that's thinking, okay, we can't release all this anger because I have a flight to catch and I want to make sure that I'm, in a focused state of mind. I know where the gate is, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So I think when you hear the story and you think about the 2 things I said, it brings you into a space where your mind respects your body instead of your mind trying to discipline your body. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's a continuous journey because we do live in this world that's like, discipline the body, eat this, do that. Then I just want to kind of plop around sometimes.
Yeah.
Just feel what's here.
Yeah. So when it comes to breath work, is there such a thing as a bad trip? And if there is, can you give some examples of when you've seen it?
I think a bad trip, it's similar to a psychedelic trip. It's when something comes up that perhaps you're not prepared for. Personally, for me, I've only seen it once, and it was with someone who they were breathing and a lot of emotions was coming up, and it seemed like it was too much for them, and they weren't responsive to me. I was inviting them to take slower breaths to try and calm down. I was inviting them to come back to the physical sensation of the body, that perhaps the session was too fast, too much, too soon, and they just went straight back into that difficult emotion that was consuming them. And it's a session I think about because I think as a facilitator, I wonder how I could have done it better or differently to have made it safer for them. So after the session, this person, they were just like, I don't want to talk about it. They were not very open to it. Their body had wanted to get something out, but they weren't ready to process that. So what makes something a bad session is I think when things are too much. And so now in my practice, especially in group sessions, I emphasize going as slowly as possible, meaning that the music is not super, it's more chill. It's a very, very slow gradation. I also work with this technique called resourcing, which comes out of somatic experiencing, which is linked to somatic therapy and trauma. by, I don't remember the guy's name, but his book is called Waking the Tiger. And basically what resourcing is before you even breathe, whatever, you try and connect to something in your life or in your body that brings you a sense of calm. Maybe that's a person, a habit, maybe it could be like the feeling of the sun on your face, just something like that, and really embody that. So that's your resource, whatever it is. Maybe it's your breath, maybe it's your knee. That's your resource. And then through the breath, we're starting to bring activation to the body, starting to bring sensation. Boxes might slowly start to open. And then we're going to pendulate back to the resource. Okay, what's here? Do you feel grounded? Okay, then you continue to breathe. Maybe you come a bit more and more things come out. Is it within your comfort zone? Okay, it's still okay. Keep breathing. It's a bit much. Let's slow it down. So in this way, we're slowly coming towards the edges of our comfort zone and coming back. So that's something that I put in, and it is possible when you go slowly. I also give people like 3 levels of activation with breathing. So at the start, I get everyone to breathe with their belly, because belly breathing is very calming. It's how you breathe when you sleep. Then I get people to do the circular breath with their nose. So a bit more activation, then finally with their mouth. But at any time, I'm always telling people, check in with yourself. Is it too much? Come down. It's not enough, go up. And so you're responding to yourself. Yeah, if it's bad trip, bad breathwork sessions has only been once. Yes. That's also why I say 12 people. Yeah. I think what also makes a bad session is if you as a breather don't feel resonance with your facilitator. Because I think there's a part of it that is relational. Like if you don't feel comfortable or safe with me, then either you won't really be present and you won't be enjoying it, or if something comes up, I won't be able to help you through. Does that help?
Yeah, that makes sense. So on your end, then, if you're seeing the same people repeatedly in different sessions, what are some of the biggest transformations that you've seen in regard to how people feel, how anxious they are, the things that they're trying to combat while in sessions?
That's a good question. I think the guy that I talked about anxiety, I think that's, something that I've really seen a transformation. And so usually when people have anxiety the first session, if it's like very bad anxiety panic attacks, the first session isn't even about getting to an altered state, really. It's about becoming aware of the breath, becoming aware of the body. And I remember our very first session when we were breathing, we had no music. We were breathing very slowly, and literally every 3 to 5 minutes I would say, what are you feeling right now? Can you connect to your resource? And it was, for the first session, it was scary to even like come a step close to that feeling of contraction anxiety. And then now, the 7th session, to be able to be like, my heart is beating so fast and I'm feeling so anxious, but actually I'm so calm. I think that's a huge step, a huge transformation. Yeah, other ones, recently, so this was one session. I gave a session to this woman who said to me that she was really wary of breathwork because she'd had bad experiences in the past. She didn't like getting into a hyperventilating state, because it can be for some facilitators, some sessions. But I said, look, we're going to really go at your pace. And we breathed. And for her, she didn't have a big cathartic release. There was no screaming or crying or shaking. But that session, she told me 3 weeks later, was really impactful because she could see. So she was breathing and she saw like her ex-husband, she saw her children, she saw colleagues at work that she didn't get on with, she saw colleagues that she did get on with, and she just had this sense of like everything is welcome. And since going forward, she said that she feels she has so much more compassion and space in her life for all of these figures that are pleasurable to be with and also difficult to be with. So that's from one session. But of course, there are so many different examples I could give. I think a final example I could give, one that is quite interesting. I've only had this once, and I would love to work more with people who have had near-death experiences. So I gave a session to someone who had a near-death experience while scuba diving. And for many months, they were having flashbacks of the experience, and they were beginning to question, like, why did I survive? Why me? And having survivor's guilt. also because one of their friends, I believe, a few months after, was scuba diving and unfortunately passed away. And in our breathwork session, again, it was one without music. It was one where we went very slowly. They were able to come back to that near-death state. I mean, I don't know if they actually wrote it, the memory of the near-death state, that being present in this here and now. And for them, they were able to make peace with it and make peace with, okay, well, it doesn't really matter why I'm here, but I'm here and I have 2 kids and I have a partner that I love and this is it. So it can be these experiences of clarity as well.
Amazing, thank you.
Thanks. How do I find more near-death survivors? Because I think for me, like, I'm personally very curious about consciousness, about death. That's why I'm doing a course in Tibetan Buddhism. So yeah, just working with people who've been to that near-death place for me is very, that's very special.
So in like the MAPS MDMA trial, there was loads of controversy about physical touch and like sexual things happening. I agree that it's also massively important therapeutically to have like appropriate physical touch. So how do you track that boundary? How do you like prevent yourself becoming overly cautious such that you don't give physical interventions that are useful?
First, I ask people if they want touch, and I remind them that they can change their mind at any time. If they say yes, that they want touch, I try and make my presence known to them before I touch them, so it doesn't come as like a jolting or a surprising thing. So I do this, for example, by making footsteps heard, by maybe speaking to them first, by putting my hand near them. Just you can sense when someone is close to you, and then I'll move into touch very slowly. I also try and keep touch and intervention as minimal as possible, unless it's needed or I feel it's needed or the person asks for it, because I do believe that, or no, I do believe. Basically, in classical reworking, so Leonard Orr, it was actually like you shouldn't even touch or talk. It's just about being present, because you have to let people complete things by themselves. If there's stuck energy about something, allowing them to breathe through it and just pass it through. So overall, I try and do minimal, but if I do touch, I make presence.
Okay. Was there a personal experience that catalyzed your interest in this area?
What is my personal
Yeah,
experience?
was there?
Oh, a few. So I think I might have said this just before you came in, that I came to breathwork in a breakdown. Basically, a friend had passed away from cancer. My mom had gotten cancer, and my first adult relationship had ended in the span of a month. And then at that time in my life, I just had a lot to do. I moved to Australia to look after my mom. I moved to China to start my master's. It was bang, bang, bang. There was no time or space to process. And then I broke down a year later, duh, of course. And in that breakdown, I went to therapy. But it was the same thing where therapists would be like, wow, you're so self-aware, you're so emotionally intelligent. Yeah, I'm very good at talking about my emotions, not so good at feeling it. That was when I found breathwork. My best friend, she actually went to Cambridge. She told me to try breathwork, and I was like, no, that sounds really boring. Why would I want to breathe? And she paid for the breathwork facilitator to come to my house to give me a private session. So honestly, I owe a lot to her, to my friends, and to the facilitator. And that session, it was just crying, just things coming out, just feeling. I will be honest and say that session didn't change my life. What did was working with that facilitator for 5 sessions over the span of 6 weeks, where every session I wouldn't know what would come up. One session it was guilt, one session it was anger, one session it was sadness. And I think it taught me that you can have so many emotions about things. You can be guilty about something, but also sad and angry and happy, and it's complex. And at the same time, I was seeing a psychotherapist, so it was super useful. I was going to breathwork, things were coming up, I was processing it physically, then I go to therapy and talk about it with the therapist, processing it intellectually. So that was when I really saw a real shift, and I think it's just completely changed the way that I relate to myself and to my body. I'm so much aware of so much more aware of how I'm feeling, of things that are happening before my mind is even aware. So I might be like, oh, my shoulders are tense. Okay, I'm a bit nervous. Like, in a way that I wouldn't be before. Before I would be like, the emotions have to build up to a point. Like, suddenly it's 2 a.m. and I'm crying. And then I would realize, oh, I've been feeling these things. But now I'm much more aware of like all the subtle changes. And it helps me to just be there for myself. Whether that's like taking a breath or, asking for what I need in an interaction.